why don't you do this? Like I think so highly of you, and I think so many in our industry think so highly of you.
Thank you.
But I can't find anything online, like any interviews. I mean, there's maybe 2 YouTube interviews. One of them's 3 minutes. The other one's 25, and you're sharing the screen with somebody else. There's no podcasts that I have found. It can't be for lack of requests. Why don't you do it?
Well, I appreciate being here. So Bipul Sinha is the one who connected us, and I'm on the board there and had a chance to know him. So he suggested to take the opportunity to do it. I've been, I'll call it semi-retired for 6 years. There's a whole story there. I won't bang the table and tell you about it, but there's a story behind that. And so if you go back further than that, you'll find tons of stuff. Right? But for the last 6 years or so, I've been primarily focused on having the opportunity to coach, help, advise, whatever the right words are, but more on a one-to-one kind of basis or small group kind of basis. So happy to do these kind of things, but in person with teams, with founders,
totally
tends to be, I think, very powerful for me, meaning that I enjoy that. And broader audience media kind of thing, fantastic, but hasn't been my thing ever since I stopped being an operator. So.
Makes sense. When you so your last acquisition at Palo Alto Networks was Evident.io. Is that right?
That's correct.
I was at Evident.io.
Oh.
I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know that.
Okay. And when I came into the organization, everybody, it's very rare to have almost a uniform reputation that's so positive about one leader. People wanted to run through walls for you. And it was sad when people were really sad. And there was a lot of people that were at the organization for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I've had Nikesh on the show, and it seems like you two have done a great job passing the baton from one to the next. But I would actually love to hear, people thought you hung it up. People thought there was more in the tank for you.
There was. It was just something different. So,
can I ask if you don't want to talk about it? It's okay.
No, fine. I actually talk about it all the time, and
cool.
I hope that it's my own journey, right? So, and everybody has their journey, and it's sometimes helpful to hear it. So, so there's a personal background thing that is important relative to this story. So I'll give it to you kind of quickly. So Karen, my wife, and I, we have 3 kids, one who's now 28, one who's 25, and one who's 14. So a very big gap, between number 2 and number 3. And when Andy, our youngest, came along, when he got to be about 7, which is about 7 years ago, right? I started to realize, for lack of a better term, not overnight, over a course of time, that as much as I really enjoyed working, and the team and Palo Alto Networks was fantastic, and I was super fortunate and blessed to be with great people. I had the best job in the world. Couldn't ask for more. And but I really started to just have this sense that with that kind of gap in the age of the kids, I knew something that people say all the time that just sounds like a throwaway thing, but it's real, which is, kids grow up very quickly. The difference between 7 and 17 in hindsight, I don't know if you have children, is 10 minutes, like in the big picture of life. And as much as I enjoyed everything I got to do professionally, running Verisign, running Palo Alto Networks, for my 2 older kids, that, I wasn't around. And, we have a great relationship, but I really wasn't there.
Did you know that while you were not there, I guess?
I think we all do at some level. And then I can only speak for myself. Okay,
yeah, of course.
Because this is so I'm not trying to reach to anybody.
No, I don't think you're pontificating.
Everybody I talk about this topic all the time, by the way. Number one topic with executives, right? Because either they're in their 30s and they're young with young kids, or they're my age and they're thinking about not doing things anymore. So this is the number one topic, not because I choose it, but everybody deals with this, right? So this is just my story. And I knew that, but I fell into, for myself, the rationalization game, which is, I'm doing all this for my family. I'm doing it for my kids. And, and there's, as all things in life, there's enough truth in something like that to make you think it's true, right? And when it's only true to a certain point. So that's point number one was I really started to struggle, again, not quickly, over a long period of time, like a year, with... I just wasn't home ever on all the things that actually mattered. And all that really matters with the kids is like, they don't care about the episodic trips to Disneyland, and those are fun. But what matters is, were you actually there? Did you put them to bed? Do you know who their friends are? Do you know what makes them happy and sad, right? And I didn't.
Is that because you're just traveling for work?
I was never home, right? If I'm doing something, 100% guy. I think A+ kind of personality, in the sense of I get an A+, like type A+, right? Personality and driven, and I loved what I was doing. I got energy from that, and but I started to get less energy from it, because the very thing that I loved, which was the people, I weighed into the crowds, I loved the customer, all that kind of stuff, started to feel like work for me. But I was like, why is that? I was only 52, but I realized that this was the reason that. And it's because I had this, I had this 7-year-old at home, and I thought, I've got this shot to with this one to choose. I think life is all about choices we make, right? I've reached I was very fortunate to reach a pinnacle of my career, for lack of a better term, with wonderful people, a fantastic company. It was great, right? What was I doing that I hadn't done, right? Like, what else was I looking for? One. Two, I knew my older kids had grown up very quickly, and I felt like if I could do that again, would I do it the same way? And I don't mean not work or anything like that, because I think we also fall in the risk of like thinking only in binary terms. You're on or you're off. I don't mean that at all, right? And then, the third thing was, what more... professionally, was I looking for that I hadn't had the opportunity to achieve, and was my identity. Who am I, right? Is it wrapped up more in am I the CEO and chairman of Palo Alto Networks? When people say, who are you? Because that's the answer I would give them. I would never say I'm Andy's father, Karen's husband, So the whole identity crisis, I think most people have too, of if I'm not this person defined by my work, who am I, right? And sorry for this long personal story. But, and then one other note to this as well, which was a long time ago, my wife, who I have to make this next comment to put everything in perspective, seriously married up. We were both, we were classmates at West Point. West Point's a hard place to get into, a hard place to get out of, but it's 10 times harder for a woman, particularly if you go back 35 years, right? And so she's my, Karen and I have been married for 35 years. She's my West Point classmate at a time. It still is very hard, but even harder, for women to get through there. She graduated much higher in the class than I did. We both went to flight school. She was a pilot, flew helicopters in the Army, and was a better pilot than me. Got her MBA at Berkeley. Had a startup, just all that.
Okay. You're out kicking your coverage.
Yeah. So my point on this, because my next comment was through a startup she had done after Berkeley in the education space, she got deep into education. And through that process, decided over a period of time, a long time ago, that she wanted to homeschool our children when we had kids. And, for a type A driven, right, person to go do that, because that's a job, right, a full-time job. To do that, later on for me, I realized was like, oh my man, what a sacrifice,
she made.
Oh yeah, that's what she did with her life, right? And what I have done, so
totally.
This is a point that comes into play.
You're saying she had, you have a very good benchmark in your own house of someone that has not only the same or better raw materials as you and drive, and ambition who made a different decision
Absolutely.
than you made.
Yeah. And we all rightfully talk about, doing things for others but in my own life in a way that I didn't realize until later on, had the complete object lesson right in front of me. Right. So I had to tell you that point of the story.
No, I think it's very clarifying. And look, you sit on the boards of Snorkel and Rubrik. We talked about Snowflake and Qualcomm. So I think you still get to scratch some of that itch today. It's obviously different than full-time operator. Can I ask you a super personal question?
Sure.
And again, do not have to answer this. Did resentment start to form at all because of those decisions that you each made? Meaning at some point, I would imagine it does beg the question of what gives, Mark?
Yep. No, I think the short answer is no, although it's not all easy.
Right.
Right. I mean, everybody again
maybe
has to
resentment internally for you started to build up. Maybe your own internal.
I think it was more about, and to complete the first part of the story, which is the answer to your question. So I was having these, what am I doing? Right. I've got the third shot with Andy, and again, my older kids were wonderful. Like there's no problem, right? But if I could replay the tape, I would have spent more time, in their life, right? Particularly at the formative periods. And, when I felt like I was doing the most important thing, which was be on the plane and do all these things, right? And again, I enjoyed it, had a great time. So all that came together. So what I did, working with the board, and Palo Alto Networks has an amazing board of directors, and they're all friends of mine, and, at Jim Getz and Carl Eschenbach and John Donne and all these guys at that time, Dan Warmenhoven. And I just told him, I said, I have to stop. Because life is choices, and if I make this choice, which is just keep doing this, I know I'm going to regret that. So I'm not going to stop right now. I'm not going to stop overnight. I'm not going to stop suddenly, but we just need to know this. It needs to come to conclusion in the best way with the best person to succeed me. And I'll come to that point in a minute if you care. And, they worked with me on that. And so I went, we figured it out. We did, I think, a very good transition. We got an unbelievably great guy in Nikesh to come in, who didn't look anything like me. That's a whole different story, right?
Totally.
And who's just knocked the cover off the ball, right? So it all worked out great. And I went home, and for the last going on 7 years, I teach. So when people now say, "What do you do?" to all these boards and everything, my answer: I'm a teacher. So Monday through Friday, I homeschool. My son, my wife and I split that now on something she did with all three kids, but now I have the benefit of doing it. I've been doing it for 6 years, and it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my life. And in doing that, I also have some more time. It's not all my time because I'm only a half-time teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And I had the opportunity to work with, on some boards and not trying to do this in any formal way. I have the chance to coach, or I don't even know if that's I don't want that to be an arrogant word, give some advice to people, right? Say, here's what I learned along the way for, a handful of CEOs, which I enjoy. And, but the formal part are the boards. And so I think I have a very good today it took me a long time to figure this out, by the way. It was really, really, really hard to stop. Back to that identity crisis. I would be a liar to say, it's great. The first 3 years were unbelievably hard.
3 years of retirement.
3 years to go from I'm this guy,
right,
defined by
transition,
this person, to I'm Andy's dad and teacher.
It took
first.
3 years.
Yeah, it was super hard. But I had the benefit of I'll call it a glide path of working with great companies.
Yeah.
Snowflake's new for me, but, Qualcomm, I was on the board for Palo Alto for 5 years after I left. Nikesh and the board were really wonderful to allow me to continue to do that. I've been the chairman of Qualcomm for a while. So a glide path of, enough things that are super interesting for me to work with great people. I get to work with people I want to work with. They're in great businesses, but it's not a full-time job. And so I've got a very good balance in my life now, which I'm grateful for, of professional aspects. But most importantly, at home, I took that third shot, and And again, if there was a lesson in all this for me, it was, life is all about choices and decisions, and the only asset you really have that you get to actually decide things on is your time. That's actually it. You don't get to decide your health. It's only your time, and you don't know how much time you have. So that was the thing that was really gnawing at me. It was like, I don't know how much time I have. What am I going to do with it? And here's the third shot, with a young guy at home. And do you choose to just keep going, or doing more because you're wrapped up into that so much, or do you choose to be part of this kid's life? So my trite little statement I tell people today is, Friday, the last day of work, I was a very relevant guy in Silicon Valley. Not a minor relevant guy, right? Meaning I was CEO of Palo Alto Networks. There's way bigger people than me. Yeah. But I was a relevant guy in business and less relevant at home. And on Monday morning, and for the next 6 years, I became extraordinarily relevant to at least one kid in the world, my kid, and less relevant in the business world. And that lack of relevancy was really, really hard to work through.
Yeah.
But now in hindsight, I'll take that trade all day long, right? So,
do you think that how old were you when you stepped away?
I was 52.
Pretty young. And do you think that you had to get to the point where you had achieved some milestones? Call it, CEO of Palo Alto Networks, big company, important company. You were the top dog there. You were the Verisign CEO before that. Maybe, did you feel like maybe there would have been a deep sense of regret if you hadn't felt like you'd at least fulfilled your perceived potential in your career before stepping away?
Possibly to probably. But I don't know, because the way it worked out like I had so again, I get to talk about this topic with a lot of people these days, and I'll put some of them in a category who are in a category called, I've been a senior operator and very successful, financially successful, like I don't have to work category, but I haven't been the CEO, and I got to go do that. And I have, and that's fine. Like, there are no value judgments to these statements. When I talk with them, I said, "Oh, I get that. Totally get that. That's a choice, right? So if you're going to go be the CEO because you just haven't done that yet and you feel like you need to, well, then you better be willing to do that for 5 years, minimally. So how do you want to spend the next 5 years, right? And if that's what you want to do, and your husband's good with it, or your wife's good with it, and your kids, like, if you're just, my whole point these days, people, which it took me a long time, is like, just self-awareness. Just look in the mirror. You don't need to convince other people of anything, because it's easy to do that. It's just when you look in the mirror and talk to yourself, which we all do, right? Are you telling yourself the truth, right? Or are you making it up because you're trying to justify, the next decision, and in a way that's, supposed to be great for everybody else, right? So,
can I ask you, when, let's say Monday, you're relevant at home, right? And irrelevant, I'll put in air quotes, in the business world, relatively speaking. That next couple of weeks, what were the stories in your head that made it so difficult? What were the things? Was it not getting the emails that you used to? Like what were the actual things that maybe actually happened, or made you so caught up in it?
Probably two things. One is, and you're living this personally, I'm sure, right? When you're working really hard and you're on your game, and you're involved, and you put an enormous amount of time and energy into your work, and when you what do you get out of that is positive reinforcement, right? You get people saying, you see results. People say, "Hey, you're really good at this," right? You get rewarded in compensation. You might get a promotion. You get all these things in the business world. They're all good, right? But they're positive reinforcement. And my little joke with people today is, I said, just remember this: work is a pie eating contest, and when you win, you get a pie. Right? So, yeah. So there's the aspect of when you're just in it like that. It literally like, I'm not exaggerating. It's literally an addiction. Like, there's dopamine, right? To get the positive reinforcement. Like, so it's not hard for us to become addicted to the positive reinforcement and feedback mechanisms of work. And they're good to a certain point, but then they're just like any addiction where, like, you can do too much of this, right? So I would compare, and I'm not doing this lightly. I'm not trying to make light of this at all, but I actually believe, there's lots of books about this. So it's not just me making it up saying, there's a lot of like dopamine addiction to go.
Yeah, your
right?
career.
Yeah.
Especially being good in your career.
Yeah. So if you were to stop that, again, not a screeching halt, right? But, to dial it back, right? You would actually have like a detox event, right? So I had to give that background to answer your question. It's like, that's the first, not just week, that's the first 3 or 6 months, right? Where you don't have that anymore, or you have less of it, and you're fumbling around with your phone every morning because what did you used to do? You get up and you watch, you get on the treadmill, you watch Jim Cramer, you're checking your text, right? And you do that until 10:30 at night, and you start again at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's you're on it, right? And then less people are reaching out. Why would they? They're going, in my case, to Nikesh for decisions now, right? So the absence of that is like coming off of something, a stimulus, and it's just like any other caffeine, whatever. If you gave that up, it'd be very hard to do that until you didn't, for a while, and you came to a new normal, right? And I've observed, talked to lots of people who did this unsolicited advice for people, like, if you're thinking about like slowing down, semi-retirement, or if you're older in retirement, whatever the case may be, that's where most people come off the rails right there in the first 3 to 6 months, because they can't take that.
And they go back in.
They do one of three things. They go back in, usually in something not great, because they're running from, not to something. They got to, exactly, right. Or they take up their hobby with a vengeance, like golf, I don't know, whatever it is, like all the time, and then that peters out pretty quickly, because that was supposed to be relaxation. That can't be your life, right? So they get confused about that, and they go do that. Or they'll do another thing, which is without giving themselves time to sort it out and figure out what they actually want to do, where do they want to allocate their time. Lots of people will come to them and say, "Why don't you do this?" And I was fortunate. Lots of people called, join this firm, do this.
Yeah, come be GP here.
XYZ, be the CEO of this, like board of this, and so they say yes, right? So they find themselves very quickly working just as hard as they used to work, but they're doing it across 8 platforms instead of 1, and that's in a lot of ways worse. To do it that way. And I'll talk to them, they'll say, "Man, I'm busier than I was when I worked." I go, "Well, yeah." Why do you think you did that, right? Primarily because you didn't give yourself enough time to sort it out. And the reason we don't give ourselves enough time is we're scared to death. It's back to the identity thing. If I'm not this person, who am I? If I stop for a while, even if it's just to take time off, let alone to, go retire, somehow we get ourselves super convinced that our half-life on being valuable is, 3 months. Like if I'm not in the game, for some reason, nobody's going to want me. I forgot everything I did and everything I learned, and I better just say yes, or nobody's going to call me anymore. Right? And I know that sounds insane, but it's so true when I talk to people and say, yeah, go take 6 months and don't do anything, right? That's my primary advice, because you'll make way better decisions, because you got to detox afterwards. And the response is, I can't do that, for 6 months, and nobody's going to want me anymore. I'm like, that's crazy, but I know, I've been there. You can scare yourself into these, kind of bad decisions, right? So.
Do you think it's possible to be a big time CEO and not sacrifice in the way that you did?
No. So this
You're convinced of that.
Yeah, and this is super important. Like in this is, and I mentioned this a little earlier, so I'll double click on it, right? Which is, we have a lot of ways to rationalize all our decisions in life, right? One I mentioned, which was to go home and say, I'm doing this for us, for the family, for the kids. We've got $100 million in bank or whatever, but I got to keep going because I don't know why, right? But I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for us. Why you give me a hard time for not being home, right? But the second one is that one. And that's I'm sure there's a word for this in behavioral, psychology, right? But it's the binary thing. We convince ourselves that we can only be binary. Like either I must be 110% or I must be zero, as if there's nothing in between those things. So the answer to that question, I think it's extremely difficult, going on impossible, at least for me, my own personality, to say I was going to go be the CEO and get that job done right and do it well, in a way that, I wasn't leaving everything on the field every day, right? Now, I know other people who are very successful CEOs who have a much better balance than I did. So when I'm saying these things, I'm a terrible example. I couldn't. I think to be a CEO of a large public company today, you by definition have to work a lot, right?
Yeah.
Whether you have to work the 11th hour in the day or the 10th, right? That's the marginal piece that I think the answer is you don't have to do that, but it's easy to do it. And that might be the hour where you had dinner with your family.
Totally.
Or the hour where you tucked your kids in bed, right? Or the hour on Saturday morning when you're at the park and you're supposed to be at the park, but you're at the park staring at your phone while your kids run the swing, right? It's those marginal hours that I think make the real difference about your presence, at home. So,
who's an interesting case study on this? Carl, who you know well, Eschenbach.
Yep, we're good buddies. Yep.
And he was sitting right here in this chair, and we talked about some of this stuff. And he was just leaving Sequoia to go to Workday. And how do you reconcile? So, Carl, pretty open, talked to the board of Workday and was like, I'm a package deal, with my wife. Interestingly, Carl had the cake and eat it too gig where he got all of the identity of being a Sequoia partner and the juice that came with it, but it's not full-time operating. It's just different. It's not the CEO of Workday type job. And every day for at least a year, maybe two, longer, you know better than me, it was eating away at him that he hadn't left it all out on the field. He hadn't reached the crescendo of his career yet. And that he couldn't live with that. And so he found a way to make that work. What do you think of that?
Sure.
Again, you're good friends with Carl. So I'm sure you two have had very long talks about this.
Yeah. Carl and Anna, are the salt of the earth, the amazing couple, and their family is amazing, right? And then Carl's an individual, as an operator, and his person is amazing. Nothing but great things to say. And we have talked about this, and it's a struggle for sure. It's everybody's individual struggle, right, as to what they want to do. I think for what it's worth in his case, the point that I made earlier is the main point. It's the self-awareness. What is your true disposition here, right? And are you looking in the mirror and admitting what it is?
Totally.
And, so I think
you're not coming up with the story that this is for other people.
Yeah. So I think to the extent that, I think he did that. He's a very straightforward, he's a prayerful guy, right? He's a faithful guy. And I think he is very self-aware about what he was trying to get done and why. And he and Anna, are an extremely close couple. And so again, these aren't value judgments do it, not do it.
Totally.
It's just saying whatever you're going to do, whatever your choice you make, just be honest about it with yourself. Don't worry about convincing other people as to what you're doing and why, and rationalizing it. And I think, not to speak about Carl, but I think he's a very grounded guy, right? So in his case, to go do the Workday thing, got it. Yeah. Fantastic. He's doing a great job, right? Not surprisingly. And I think his family's very supportive and all good, right? Because his disposition is pure.
Yeah.
And self-aware about it. Whereas in other cases, other people make decisions about, I got to go do that for me, right? But I'm going to try to convince you it's for you, all right? So I don't think that's his case at all.
Yeah. Do you, how do you reconcile this idea that, it seems to me that there is a pattern where the highest, most upper echelon, like top, let's just say like top 10, the Zuckerbergs of the world, right? It almost seems like that's a requirement to be that. Like this sacrifice has to be. Do you agree with that?
Well, being very far away from that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, right? It'd be hard for me to try to project in any way like that. But I do think that if you just come back to like your life, okay, right? And if you're fortunate enough to be making a very significant impact in the business world, and if you're doing that, then you probably have the financial capabilities to make impact in the world beyond. And so, some of these folks, right, are so bigger than me, like in their visions and what they're able to do, be impossible for me to try to project there, right? So, but what I can do, because we can all do this, is say, come back to your sphere, right? Which is like, hey, there's people in my life that are super important, or they should be, right? Because we've chosen to have life together, and I have the chance to go do some amazing things, right? And I've got platforms for that and do that. But what does that do to or with these folks? And you can make it work, I think, right? But it's all back to the try not to make it binary. Like I think another trap we can fall into is the things I'm doing at work are so important, for my customers, partners, or society, that the sacrifices I make at home are worth it because I'm doing this for, society, right? And maybe that's true. I don't know. But back to my point before, it's like, well, that's a choice you make,
Yeah.
And again, I'm not judging them whatsoever. It's just, at the end of the day, when another favorite thing of mine is like, hey, when you're, 75, 80, if you get to be there, right? Who's hanging out with you around your bedside?
It's not your board
on your last days, right? It's as great as it was. It's not through your board of directors, right? It's so who is it? Anybody, right? And if it is, who are those people, and why would they be there? And all the other stuff just melts away, over time, right? It's not that this wasn't important. It's all important, right? But it's like all those things go away over time. It's stripped away, right? Until you're just, it's yourself and those who actually are meaningful to you in a non-work environment. That's where we're all going, right? So,
do you think how old's your kid now? Your youngest?
He's 14.
So is he going to be homeschooled through high school too?
Actually, so he just finished up 8th grade, and the way Karen had treated homeschooling all along, again, because this for her was a profession, and she was deep in the education, and like she had reasons to do this,
totally.
Right? And it was a year by year. So every year for each one, we said, is it working?
Uh-huh.
Right? And for our oldest, who's a product manager at Zoom now, and she's doing great, and that worked all the way through high school. Right. And then for my middle son, who, he's a marketing guy, and that worked great until 8th grade. And then he went to Bellarmine,
mm-hmm.
right, and SMU. And for Andy, worked great till the end of 8th grade. And now he's going to go to high school next year. So, for every kid's different, right? So we just every year would say, is this optimal? Is this optimal? Is this optimal? Right?
So let me ask you then, like we're in summer.
Mm-hmm.
Andy's going into high school.
Mm-hmm.
You're no longer going to be half-time teacher.
Slightly. So what we're doing with him is he's going to a smaller academy that is sort of like I'll call it a halfway house on homeschooling to schooling. So you're physically there 2.5 days. The other 2.5 days, the parents are still very involved in the teaching. So it's less time, right, than it was before. Like it's going to halftime of what my halftime was, right? But it's not pure.
Yeah, and it's and you know, like high school, it's different. It's a different time in his life too, right?
Exactly.
Start getting into the like, you know, you're not always wanting to spend time with mom and dad anymore.
Exactly right. And I also think that yes, that's right. And then also an unbelievably important time, you know, for parents with kids. So there's a real tension there, right? Which is, you know, this is the from experience, right? I can say this is the age and this is the time where, the kids want to be less time with you and more time with their friends. That's natural. We've all done that, right? So you know, how involved do you want to be with that without being over involved? Right? There's a balance you got to figure out in there as they make their way into the world that way. You know, how much engagement, involvement are you going to have? You know, who is influencing your children at this very formative time, and you want it to be other kids. You want it to be world experiences, right? But then it's obvious today to say, well, not 100%. Right. So I think this might be a good balance for us of involved but not overly involved.
And how old are you now?
58.
So let me ask you this. Maybe I'll couch it in an energy question. Mm-hmm. How much energy do you have now relative to 7 years ago?
I think, I think quite a bit. But I will say this, that when I was in the game, you know, as the CEO going, there was a lot of adrenaline.
Right.
There's a lot of adrenaline versus energy. Okay. And I think there's a distinction between those two things, which is energy, positive energy will get you so far. And then there's on top of that is adrenaline, back to the kind of the dopamine kind of thing, right? Which will get you further than that. But over a long period of time would be, you know, really unsustainable, right? And it could be emotionally problematic, physically problematic, right? And so I'd say I've got a lot of energy, but I'm not compelled or interested to run on adrenaline anymore. Right? So, you know, to take the time to make the choices, to work. You know, I said I'm super fortunate I get to work with people I want to work with.
It's almost like the way that I internalize that is like I think I have a lot of energy naturally, and I do think that work does give me energy. However, you know, when I was on a flight pretty late on Tuesday coming back, and I felt an urge to open my laptop, and I just had to get a few more things done. Mm-hmm. And that turned into the entire flight.
Right.
That felt like adrenaline to me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's the addiction.
Yeah.
Like when you don't have to pick up your phone, but you do every 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. So here's a good, again, I'm full of advice these days, you know, but it's
great.
Unsolicited, but I'd say, here's a good test, right? You know, and for me, it was really hard, and I can't say I'm there, you know, but I would say it's, if you want to kind of, you know, take a test on this and the self-awareness and things we're talking about, are you capable of silence? Pick a time frame. Start with 5 minutes. I will challenge, you know, anybody, right, to say, can you be quiet for 5 minutes? Not look at your phone, not look at the TV, just sit in a chair and do nothing for 5 minutes, except think, you know, and try to be quiet. And if you can't do that, then perhaps, you know, you have this kind of adrenaline issue, right? And if you can do that over time, I would say give yourself a time frame, a year, right? So you don't have to try to turn it into a project that you have to complete, right? Can you do that for 15 minutes? And if you could do that for 30 minutes, okay, right, in the morning, before you jump back in the phone and all that stuff, not just for me, but there's lots of people would say this. If you could do that for 30 minutes in the morning, maybe stretch, whatever you're doing, right? My point is just be quiet for 30 minutes in the morning. You will have a much better day, even if you're working your butt off, right? You'll make better decisions. You'll start the day better.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I did. And for me today, that's, more than an hour of time every morning. For me, it's prayer. But that started with a couple minutes, and over years got to an hour. Now that may sound nuts, right? An hour of time in the morning. There's people say, I can't afford that, right? But I would wager this to say, if you could be at the point where you took 30 minutes, 45 minutes in the morning in silence, meditation, prayer, whatever your thing is, right? But if you could actually do that, you'll be a long way to overcoming adrenaline and addiction, and you will make better decisions all day long, and you'll be happier as a person all day long if you start your day that way. But that's a discipline. It takes time because you're fighting against this adrenaline addiction thing. So next time you're on the plane, and you're doing that, challenge yourself. Just say, I'm not going to open a laptop for 50 minutes. It's actually,
it's the heart. So when I'm in routine, which I guess whatever that means, because I'm on a plane most weeks, so I'm rarely in routine. But when I'm at home this morning, I take 10 minutes. That's my upper bound right now. And maybe I'm cheating. 5 minutes of that is like brushing my teeth and et cetera. And then the other 5 is just sitting there.
Yep.
I don't look at my phone. I refuse. The only time I look at my phone is to turn the alarm off, and I don't look at any of the notifications. Just 10 minutes away from my phone. I'm not allowed to open anything until I have a sip of coffee. Sit down. That works for me. That's been helpful.
Yeah.
When I'm traveling, it gets really hard.
Super. I've been in 10,000 hotels, right? And literally millions of hours on the airplane. And it is very hard, right? Because you're going, what else would I do?
Well,
right? And it's difficult.
But
if you can do that, it's a suggestion. Just go, hey, that's great. You got your 10 minutes, right? Don't count the brushing the teeth.
That doesn't count.
Doesn't count. No activity counts, right?
Nothing.
Just
sitting.
Look at the window. Look at the trees. I don't know, right? I think that'll go a long way.
Why did you leave the military? You went to West Point.
I did, yeah, and
then you became a pilot.
I did. So the quick story in that is there's a lesson in life for me in this as well. Is for some reason, I don't know why, all I ever wanted to do was go to West Point when I was a kid. I don't come from a military family.
Where'd you grow up?
Philadelphia. So,
and your parents were not in the military?
Zero military background. Like maybe I read a pop-up book when I was 6 years old. I don't know, right? But I was 100% laser focused. I'm going to West Point, right? And thank God I got in. I know I'd get in today, right? But I got in. And all I ever wanted to do was be in the Army, make a career out of that. And if you checked in with me when I went to West Point, I'd be like, yeah, And I was an ambitious guy. And I said, when I'm going to be the chief of staff of the Army, right? Like the top guy, And my classmate today is the chief of staff of the Army, right? So our year group, right? That's where we are. And I went to flight school. I was fortunate to do that. I flew Cobras, attack helicopter in the Army. And then, as life works out, best laid plans, one night in a night vision goggle flying exercise, we were in an accident. And I was injured and spent time with Walter Reed a long time. And what
was the accident?
It was.
By the way, we don't have to talk about this if you don't.
No, it's fine. It's fine. There's a lesson in this, which I'm happy to tell people is nothing super dramatic, not a fiery fireball, nothing like that. Just a stupid. I wasn't on the controls. A stupid pilot error thing. Other guy in the controls, two-person aircraft, and he was fine, and I wasn't. And lots of
the helicopter crashed.
Yeah, it just a very, very, very hard landing. Again, not a fireball kind of thing, right? So I don't want to overstate it.
You thought you were closer to the ground at night.
Yeah. Then flying night vision goggles. When you're flying, all you ever want to do is get more hours. That's all you want to do. Like more hours, more landings. Everything's important about what do you get? And we were just out in the middle of a field somewhere and flying NVGs. And I was front seating. That's the gunner seat. You switch seats every flight, And the guy said, I'm getting one more landing. I said, yeah. Cool, right? It's 3:00 in the morning. That's what I would do, right? And so I was trying to get a jump on the paperwork. So I'm hunched over in my seat with my red, flashlight because night vision goggles, you can blow your vision if any light comes in, right? So I'm like way over.
Hunched over.
Yeah, I got the logbook out. I'm logging. I'm just trying to get ahead so when we land, I can be home by 4 o'clock in the morning and get to bed, right? And he put the thing into a perfect hover, thought he was 3 feet off the ground, thought he was on the ground, right? Just had such a perfect position. And NVGs, you have no depth perception. And at least back in those days, it's much better today. Anyway, so he thought he was there. He was still, 15 feet off the ground, just turned it off and just dropped the whole thing out of the sky, bent the skids out. And because he was flying and he was fine, meaning he was
like sitting upright,
sitting
in the cockpit.
Yeah. And I was in a very contorted position. And I wasn't fine. So I ruptured some disc and, anyway, a couple operations and then, so my military career was.
How long did you spend at Walter Reed?
Over the course of 6 months, like in and out.
6 months?
Yeah, not 6 months in bed, but 6 months.
This was a serious injury.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad and bad enough that I was disabled and medically discharged. And so, point in all that was my whole dream, and we all have dreams.
Yeah,
and we all want to be in control of our life.
Your entire identity at that point.
Friday afternoon, I was a pilot in the Army, and Monday I was irrelevant. Right?
Yeah.
And but I'll tell you this about that story because I'm not. Look, it's not a. I think this is really important as you get older in life, right? And I tell young people this all the time. So I was 24, and I thought it was all over. I was despondent, very bad. I was in a very bad.
You were depressed,
off the charts, right? Because I was in the hospital. I'm broken. I'm getting medically discharged from the Army. My career is over. All my classmates are moving ahead, and I'm just left behind, right? And I don't know what I'm going to do. And I was on my way. My next duty station was Korea. That's where I was going. Everything I owned was in Korea. That's where I was heading next. And Karen, my wife, not at that time, we were dating. She was a pilot, and she went to Fort Lewis, Washington, in Washington State. So we were staring down as a couple. We're a serious couple. Her being in Washington and me being in Korea for 2 years. Maybe we would have made it. Maybe we wouldn't have made it. I don't know. But during the process of being discharged, which turned out to be a very long, uncertain, painful event in itself, the Army said, "Where would you like to go while this process is working?" And by then I had learned how the Army works, and I said, "Here's my top 3 choices: Hawaii, Italy, right? And whatever you do, don't send me to Fort Lewis, Washington, please, right?" So of course I got orders to Fort Lewis, Washington, right? And so we ended up there together. But my point on this was the worst thing at that time in my life that ever happened to me was that all my dreams were dashed. Everything seemed like the end of the world. And but I also believe had that not happened, would I be married to Karen and have 3 beautiful children? And I don't know, right? So, a proverb I liked, I think it's Chinese, says, "You can't judge the day until the evening." So in hindsight, I would tell you the worst thing that ever happened in my life was the best thing that ever happened in my life. And if I knew what I knew today and went back in time and I was flying, they said, "Your choice, go down tonight or not," I would say, crash it, right? Because
you would?
Absolutely, right? Because I think that was extremely influential, providential in me being married and have these 3 beautiful kids. And so my point on that is we all have plans and we want to be in control of our life, and stuff happens. We're not really in control, right? And stuff happens. And we set our own expectations and we get very despondent when we miss those expectations. So my advice to people is, you don't know, man. Like, this might be happening to you right now, but you actually don't know.
Yeah.
As to whether it's, quote, good or bad. And you might not know for 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay? So relax.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Was it more of a gnawing feeling when the Palo Alto Networks transition happened in your mind, or was there an equivalent? I think the crash is an extreme example, but was there anything that figuratively, not literally, broke your back at in the professional world?
No, it was
a gnawing, growing feeling.
As I mentioned, it kind of was over time. But I'll tell you one thing I did notice. It wasn't overnight, but I did notice this was when I was running Palo Alto Networks, I worked with the team there. The difference between the energy and adrenaline I mentioned before, right? I loved, and I still do. I love being with the people. That's what the whole ball game is, right? In my opinion, and I would wade into the crowd, right? I loved being with the customers. In the morning, you're getting on the elevator, and there's people crowding the elevator, and I would make sure I got in there. And if there was people that I had not seen before, I'd introduce myself, make sure they introduced themselves to people in the elevator. By the time we got to the 10th floor, everybody knew each other, and and I loved that, right? And then over time, I realized that because I was these decisions, maybe being tired, I don't know, but more importantly, these personal decisions at home, I found myself waiting for the next elevator, figuratively and literally, right? And the things that were giving me the energy in the first place were actually feeling like work now. So I started to see myself as like, oh, now I need to be on. I need to turn on right now, and play the role, right? Whereas before it was just all that. I was just on. There was no playing anything. That's just who I am over time. And I realize that. And I give that advice to people today too. And I say, if you hit the point where the things that used to be the energy field, the positive energy field, feel like work, you should really think about that, about a change. Maybe a change in jobs inside the same place, a change in career. I don't know, right? But because when it really becomes work, then you have to be on and you have to act, right? And everybody can see through that pretty quickly, right? Mm. And you kid yourself if you think they can't, right? Especially if you're the boss, So again, that was a process, and that led me, to talk with the board about saying, "Hey, I think I got to go." And I have a different chapter in my life that's becoming clearer and clearer to me, and I need to go do that, and let's make sure we do it well. And then, that allowed us to say, okay, we're going to make a change. What would that change be? And if you care, I'll give you a minute on that transition, because I think this is important. And I've seen this now as being a board member, in other, boards. And so we said, okay, we're going to make a change. Who would we get, right? And we worked out like a job spec, and not surprisingly, it looked like me, right? And so I wrote a different one, gave it to the board, and I said, the security from here on out, right, is going to be really defined by SaaS and cloud and data, plus all the other stuff that we're doing, just enterprise selling and this stuff. So the next CEO here shouldn't look like me at all. It should be somebody who looks like that. Right? Mm-hmm. 1, 2, we know security, like between Lee Claridge and Yerzuk, the founder, and these guys are brilliant. They know everything about security. So we could probably get somebody up to speed on security. But can that person get us up to speed on what's going to really impact security later on if they're coming from a different place, right? And based on that, we were extraordinarily fortunate. Sometime in life is important to find Nikesh, and who was a guy who wasn't at all coming from
not
security.
Not an obvious choice.
Yeah, very non-obvious. Not coming from security, not coming from the enterprise space, right? But absolutely brilliant, and
never been a CEO before,
and knew these other things, right? So, a situation where you go, yeah, it's a non-obvious choice, right? But we had a lot of clarity saying, but it's the right one, for these reasons. And it's going to be rough sledding. And it was, for the first 6 months, right? People were like, who's this guy?
Totally.
And, but obviously the right decision in hindsight, right? And he's done an amazing job, and he's done a better job than me. And I mean that I think this is an important transition thing, which is, I think the guy before me did a great job, and I think I did with the team, I did a fine job, right? And now he's done even a better job, right? And I think this goes into, transitions, particularly CEO transitions, later on, one of the tests about whether you did a good one or not was, does the next person, are they doing better than you did, in the sense of, like, Nikesh took the company to, a market cap that was, 5-6 times bigger than I did. I took it 4 or 5 times. He took it 4 or 5 times, but at a much bigger scale.
Yep.
And that's the test, right? Is not everybody going, gee, we wish Mark were still here.
Yeah.
Is it smooth? And ideally, you forget about Mark in a good way, right? You're like, that was fine. That was this leg, and now there's this leg, and there'll be the post Nikesh leg at someday, right? And I think boards mess that up a lot, and back to the CEOs who are leaving, they mess that up all the time. Back to the who's my my identity and what am I trying to get done here, and they can't let go, right? And instead of saying it's better to fade into the background and just try to help from the background, and hopefully this person does I'm going to say a better job. I only mean that in the sense of scaling, right? Than you. That's a good transition when it just goes like that. Like, I'll use Cristiano at Qualcomm, and
Past guest of the show.
Okay, yeah. So he, when he took over from Steve, and I was chairman of the board, that like that. I thought it's a very good transition. Steve did a great job, for Qualcomm through a very troubled period of time, and Cristiano has built upon that and has taken Qualcomm to new places, and it's great, right? Everybody did a great job. And there's lots of examples of other companies where the CEO transition ends up with the old CEO back in the building, right? And go, that should never happen, right? That's just piss poor execution on everybody's part.
Why do you think, by the way, do you mind if we go a few minutes?
I'm fine.
Okay. Why do you think boards get it wrong? I have some thoughts, but
I think probably the main thing is that if you can't imagine the company without the CEO, it's a problem. So that's one thought. The second thought is boards, as a general matter, and if they're really good boards, kind of doesn't matter, is what the board's main job is who is the CEO. There's a lot of other things the board needs to do, but that's the main job, right? And it's hard, particularly if you have a large publicly traded company, to figure out transitions. And we just did a transition with Frank and Sridhar at Snowflake, right? These are, and I think Sridhar is exactly the right guy to lead the company and to from what it needs to do from product. And Frank is a legend. Like, you can't be, how do you beat Frank? You don't, right?
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not trying to do that. It's not like get Frank. It's
totally.
It needs. He's done an amazing job, right? And now the company, needs a guy like Sridhar, right? And so these are additive things, not changes, right? But I think boards, and they realize to say your main job is who's running the company, and two, given how hard they are, generally don't want to change. It's a hard thing to go do, right? And it creates a lot of work and anxiety and turmoil. So boards generally just don't want to make a change, right? And then if you have a CEO in the chair where their identity is so wrapped up in the company itself that they don't want to leave ever, right? Or you can't imagine that company without that CEO. Well, then you got a real problem there, right? So if the person's become bigger than the team, right, or be bigger than the company. So I think if you take all that in the mix, the boards tend to, the first move is to say, I want to get the next CEO, and they should look like the CEO who's leaving, and that's usually a mistake. Is say maybe that's where you end up, but that shouldn't be your starting point. That's the opportunity to say, what's the next step? What does the Ballmer transition look like at Microsoft, right? To the product side, as good as that all the go to market was. Where's the product leg that we need to take next, right? So it's the opportunity to do that. But I think there's kind of a safety net feeling of saying, oh, let's just get somebody who looks just like the person who just left. And I think that's probably the biggest mistake. And the second mistake that's right around that one would be, if you're going to make a change. You can, if the previous CEO is going to be around the hoop, which is questionable in the first place. But if they are going to be around the hoop, then they're around the hoop in a way that is constructive. Like Frank is around the hoop, at Snowflake still, which is fantastic. But Sridhar's running the company, right? And I was around the hoop at Palo Alto Networks for a while, right? But Nikesh definitely was running the company, right? So there's a way to do that, but a lot of times that's not the way it gets executed. And if the outgoing CEO is still in the building and has cast a long shadow, and that's a mistake, particularly if they can't let go.
I think it's actually maybe easier for non-founder CEOs to hand the baton off, maybe because the identity is a little bit more detached than the person that literally started the company.
Sure. Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about before, which is this identity crisis about who am I and how,
right.
For a founder CEO, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times harder from an identity crisis perspective. Right?
Totally.
Than say, I'm going to call myself a hired gun.
Yeah.
I like to go run Verisign or Palo Alto Networks. Hard, but, it's not my baby, right? In that way. So I think it's much harder for a founder CEO to gracefully move on in a way that's constructive, where you're, it's not about you. I'll give you a great example of somebody from a distance, because I've had a chance to meet him obviously a number of times, but I think has done this extraordinary. Was Paul Jacobs at Qualcomm, a guy who founder CEO, right, and then over time was able to hand off the company, and but not trying to run it, or make decisions operationally, extremely supportive, but from a distance, right? And so, it can be done. There's a great example of somebody who's done an amazing job at that.
Was it obvious to you to go join Palo Alto Networks?
Yeah, it was. It was, but I'll give you a quick on that, because I give this advice too. I was just talking to somebody the other day about this, which was, if you have the opportunity, this kind of goes to sit in your chair for 5 minutes for silence, right? But in my life, I had the opportunity to take some time off between Verisign and Palo Alto Networks, and I took some advice from somebody, and it turned out to be really, really important, which was, if you're going to leave A and you don't know what you're going to do next, right, and you're working really hard, if you can do this is a financial statement, right, and then also a mental statement, but if you could do this to take off some time to detox, you cannot make a good decision about your next thing when you're in the moment. Just your head's not clear, right? So can you take some time, 3 months minimally, to detox right off of the adrenaline, to be thoughtful about what you're going to do next? And in that time frame, can you create I call it a paradigm. What would the perfect thing look like? Why? Most of us, when we think about it, like our jobs, how do we get them? Somebody called, said, hey, take a look at this, right? And you go, oh, I'll take a meeting on that. And that leads to 2 meetings, leads to 5 meetings. Next thing you know, you have an offer and you feel like you're compelled to do it because you're so far down the path, and you take the job, right? And hopefully it works out. A different way to do it would be to say, I created a 5-step paradigm, in that time off, which would be, the perfect thing would look like this, boom, 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 right? And because of that, I had a lot of, I was fortunate. A lot of people were calling about different stuff, and but 98% of them I could dispense with in a phone call. Tell me this. Bang,
Can you
bang,
tell
bang.
me what those things are?
Yeah, they were. I knew I wanted to do something that was not a public company. I just had been a public company CEO, so I would do another public company, but ideally,
this was pre-IPO.
Yeah, this is pre-Palo Alto Networks IPO, and just. As a side note, as a little story in this, through Jim Gatz and Nashim, in 2008, I had the opportunity. We lived in Virginia. I was running Verisign at the time, and I got the offer to run Palo Alto Networks the first time.
This was 3 years before you actually took it?
Yeah, in 2008, but we would have to move back. We'd been in California. There's a story I'll spare in this, but we were living in Virginia, and I was commuting every week to California, to Virginia, choices we make in life. But I had to move back to California, obviously, to take the Palo Alto Networks job. Went home, talked to Karen. Then only 2 kids, young. What do you think? And they had a very good life in Virginia, right? Good network, friends, everything. And she said, and the kids who were young said, if you want to do that, we will support you and we'll do that, but we would prefer to stay here. So with these choices in life, I went back and I said to Jim and Ashim, I would love to do this. Like, I know this is going to be important. I'd love to do this. And because I had my paradigm, I can't, because if I were to do that, that decision would be all about me. Mm-hmm. And I just can't do that. I won't do that for the family. Thank you very much. I'm sure I'll regret this for the rest of my life. And I became the CEO of I'd been at Verisign, left Verisign, back to Verisign, became the CEO. And then that's what I did for the next 3 years. And then in 2011, they called me back and said, now we're getting ready to go public. And you've just spent the last 3 years as a public company CEO. And we're sure the answer is no, based on the whole conversation before. But we wanted to just check. We're about to make an offer to a different guy, And I called. I was in the midst of a flight. Stop over in Chicago, called Karen, just said, I think the answer to this is no, but I want to check. And, the kids were 3 years older and they said, no, it'd actually be kind of fun to go back to California for a while as long as we don't have to commit to that forever. Okay. So called Jim and Ashim back. I'm like, well, I'm in, So.
No way.
Yeah. So that's how I got to.
Did you go through another interview process and everything?
No, they, because I.
How long did it take from their call to your call back to them?
A funny story, so I won't mention names, but they had a different guy who we all know in mind who was going to take the job, and he's a very good, he's a very successful guy, very good negotiator, I'm sure. So, and I had met in 2000. I had met Nir and Lee and Renee and the whole team, and I had an offer, right? So. Basically, they said the team would still like to work with you, and I said I'd still like to work with the team. And I was flying back across the country. I called Karen, left a voicemail when I got on the plane. I called her in Chicago and talked to her live, and she said, "Okay, let's do it." And then I landed here, and I called Jim Getz, and I said, "I'm in." And he said, "Great, let's get together tomorrow. We'll talk about the pay." I said, "Whatever you were offering to X is good with me because I know he's a good negotiator."
No way.
Yeah. So he said, "Okay, we're done." So it took 10 minutes.
You just took his offer.
Sight unseen. Yeah. And then, they sent it to me. We worked a few things out, but it was, but anyway, back to this, I got off track there, but the point was I'd taken the time to come up with the paradigm that my 5-piece paradigm, because I knew it was ideally a private company was, and this had nothing to do with Palo Alto Networks. It was just saying, whatever the thing is that you're going to be selling, right? It's in a very large and very fast-growing total addressable market. And this will sound quaint today, but at the time I said that's got to be at least $1 billion, right? It's meaning that not that Forrester or Gartner says in 3 years it's going to be $1 billion. People spend $1 billion on this today, whatever it is. Whatever that widget is, right? Mm-hmm. In our case, it was firewalls, right? So it's a large and growing addressable market opportunity. You don't have to create the TAM or have another variable called the TAM grows really, to $1 billion plus, right? The second thing was technology-wise, whatever you're doing, that everybody, even the competition, if it was grudging, would admit it's disruptive. It doesn't mean it's going to work and you're going to win, but you're definitely doing something differently that if it were true and it worked would be disruptive to the TAM, right? The third would be the core engineering team was in the building around that. Like if you could put just a core handful of dream team people around whatever this technology in the building, 5, 7 guys and or 10 people in the building, engineering wise, they're in the building because great technology people attract great technology people, so if they've got the cred already.
And you want them physically there.
They're there because as a non-founder, non-technical CEO, I was very confident of my ability to say, I don't know what the situation looks like, but I can fix marketing. I can fix sales. I can fix finance or get great people to do all these things and build a great team around that. But I don't have enough credibility to attract the world's best technical talent on this issue, whatever it is, right? So ideally they're in the building already. And then the next part in that was that there's already some traction that you could see. It doesn't have to be, you're far from the game being over, decisions being made because it's earlier stage, but there's clear traction, back to disruptive, that people are willing to give it a shot, right? So that, you don't have to guess whether it's beta versus VHS, to use a super old example, right? And then the last thing is that the investors, in this case, the firm and the actual partner, because sometimes people confuse venture money with the firm versus the partner, right? And you want the firm and the partner, But the investors have made money in this space already. One, so it's not their first foray into this space. They've already made money here. And two, that the people, the actual, in this case for me, it was Jim and Ashim, were already very successful people. They didn't need to put any, and their firms were very successful and the people were very successful. They didn't need to put points on the board with Palo Alto Networks. They wanted to, but they didn't have to. And my point on that was they're long-term thinkers. They don't need to put their own money in the bank, and the firm doesn't need their first home run, right? So they're not going to shortchange or make short-term decisions about this asset where you've got the opportunity for it to be a really big deal, right? And
play for the home run.
Yeah, because
you can go big.
Yeah, and because if you add all those things together, it doesn't guarantee success at all. But I'm a big believer in play the odds in life, right? And if you had all 5 of those, doesn't mean you're going to win, but you really stack the deck in your favor about the opportunity to win. So when Palo Alto, and I tell people this all the time, you find 2 of those all the time, you find 3 of those some of the time, you find 4 of those occasionally, but you don't find 5 of those a lot, right? And if you do, you should take it, right? So when Palo Alto came along in 2008, boom, 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 I said, I definitely want to do this. No, I didn't. Back to the family first thing the first time around, and thank God it came around a second time, right? And all those things were just more validated 3 years later, right? And so, but I knew that that's absolutely something that I would do without having heard Palo Alto Networks before. I had my list already, and it just rang all 5 bells.
You hadn't even heard of the company?
Not in 2008. No, when Jim called me.
You just were looking for those criteria.
Yeah, and people. I got a lot of calls and people said, what about this? What about that? What about that? But, because I had the criteria in one meeting or a phone call, I was able, without exaggeration, to dispense politely with 98% of things that people were bringing to me, because I'm like, I'm going to wait for the right pitch. I'm willing. And this is back to fear. And, when you're saying, I better say yes or nobody's going to ask me anymore. And I tell people, if you can, you should watch 100 pitches go over the plate before you swing, right? Because, it's in nature, it's in the nature of the beast, I think, particularly in, the venture world, private equity world, is if you got somebody who's a good operator, what's the first thing the firm's going to show them, right? They're going to show them a problem. They go, gee, if you're willing to take on this problem and take this C and turn it into a B+ for us, that's a giant win for us, right? Mm-hmm. You got to say no to a lot of C and B- opportunities before they start to show you the top shelf, and say, okay, here's the top shelf, right?
Yeah.
Meaning if you're not super proven in your career.
I wasn't sure Kleiner Perkins was ever going to show me the top shelf, so I just decided to join him.
Then you know what I mean, right? Yeah.
Is it true that when you're recruiting people, I read this somewhere, so it might not be true, but you'll go before you hire them to their house?
Occasionally.
Have you done that?
Yeah, I have done that, and occasionally, and I'm a super big believer in people, and if you want to get to the heart of the matter, sort things out, right? If you're interviewing somebody, and the advice I give to people too is, if you're particularly if somebody on the senior team, they're going to work for you, if you're the CEO, direct report, 2 things are very important, I think, is one is do the references first. I don't mean the references like have Hydrate and Struggles or, Spencer call people. You do it. And not anybody that the person offered to you as a reference. We all, we're only 2 degrees of separation maximum away from anything in life these days, right? So start with that before you spend any time with the person, right? Because you can simplify things. And then at the end, if you really want to know somebody, invite yourself to dinner at their house and have a dinner with their family, right? If they have a family, right? What's on the walls, what's on the mantles, right? You'll learn everything about that person in an evening, about what they value and how they treat each other. I mean, you'll learn a lot, right? In a quick time, observation. So, that might sound kind of extreme, but if you're going to really if you're going to war with this person, to use a military analogy, for 5 or 7 years, right? Then you're going to war with them, or you're going to team up, whatever the right analogy is. You're teaming up with the whole family, right? So it'd be nice to get to know them. That's a good starting point. And it doesn't mean everybody has to be like close personal friends in that way. I'm not suggesting that at all. But when things come off the rails for people, they come off the rails at home first, right? And so making sure people are committed, are they aligned, in what this journey is going to be at home? Very, very important. This is a starting point on that, right? Which is like I said, you'll learn a whole bunch about people just watching them interact with their family.
Have you felt your instinct almost always is correctly reaffirmed, whether it's a yes or a no when you do that?
Yeah, there's a couple examples of where I've done that and then at the bottom of the ninth inning and walked away. But again, very politely, no harm, no foul, but walked away and just said, there's no alignment here.
Can I ask you why?
Because there was no alignment, where it was clear that this person and their significant other were not aligned on what the next 5 years of the life was going to look like. They may have thought they were, but they're not. In a joint time together,
you could sniff that out.
Absolutely, absolutely, and just like, it's better. For not just for us, but also for that person to go.
Meaning you didn't think that the candidate actually had the spouse's support in an unequivocal way that they needed to do the job.
Yeah, and that became very obvious. I mean, more than, a couple, 3 times, more, where just in that conversation, like, you need to work this out.
Right.
And it's okay.
Right.
There's no value judgment. It's like, you're not aligned about what, and in this case, a late stage startup, pre-IPO company journey looks like, and what the expectations are about what that's going to take from you, because it's going to take, back to the whole life balance stuff. And I was not a great example, but I would tell him, like, let's not talk about work-life balance. It's super important, but I'm not here to give that to you. You need to figure that out. We need a lot of commitment from you, right?
Totally.
Hard work, and I will lead by example on that.
Yeah, a lot of flights.
Yeah, it's going to take that. And your work-life balance, which is absolutely critical, and family is first, and I'm a true believer in that. I'd encourage you to actually do that. Go figure that out, right? Well, I'll work with you on it, but I'm not here to monitor that for you, right? And I mean, this is my direct reports. Exactly. That's not the way this works. Right? You need to draw the boundaries. I'm not going to draw the boundaries, right? And whatever those boundaries are, we'll make it work out. But if you're just starting off at a very wrong or very misaligned point, you're never going to get that right.
Has your demeanor changed since six years ago, leaving as the CEO? Meaning, you strike me as very zen almost now. Does that come from a religious place? And you've always had that zen? Or is this a byproduct of the adrenaline wearing away? Does the question make sense?
It does make a lot of sense. And I would say it's a very gradual, right? But even when I was working really hard, so this is not like Mark today versus Mark 2.0 versus Mark 1.0. So even when working very hard, a number of the things we're talking about here, which are really going to values, right? And were very important. And I'm a giant believer, this probably comes from West Point, like, you lead by example. Don't ask somebody to do something you wouldn't do, and don't pretend you're doing things when you're not, right, in front of other people. So I would say, I've made a lot of mistakes in my career that I realized over time that I tried to correct over time. One of them is trying to do other people's jobs for them, not letting people do their jobs, right? Being so wound up about like, we got to get this right, that, you over rotate and trying to do better and better jobs in that over time. And, with age and experience and wisdom, and thinking about what's really important in life. And, again, this will take your whole life to do it if you're fortunate, right, to do it. Yeah, I think you can get to a different place where work is in perspective. It's work. Like it's very important, but it's not your life. Mm-hmm. It's an important part of your life, but it's not your life. And that's something that's always been important for me, but my execution on it has evolved,
totally
over decades, right? Where it's easy to have work be your life and be your identity.
Do you think you could rev it up again?
I won't. I don't want to.
But could you?
I think that I think that people do what needs to be done.
Rise to the occasion.
Exactly. And I mean that, I'll use my mother as an example, single mom, raised 3 kids on a shoestring, right, kind of thing. Like she did what needed to be done, right? So she was super revved up, at a different level than what we're talking about right now. So I think people do what needs to be done. I think the real question is, do you want to do it and why? Right. So for me today, I believe this to be true, and I never say never to anything, but it's like, I don't want to be an operator. Could I go do it? Yeah, I think I could. I know how to do it, right? If I put my mind to it, I put my back into it, right? Could I do it? Yeah, I think I could do that, right? But at what cost relative to everything else, in my life, right? And so I think it's more of a choice. Like, I don't think that's what I want to do. And if I have any value left, I'm only 58, but if I do, I think it's more of talking with people, coaching them, and saying, I love the time I get with 32-year-old first-time CEOs, fast-growing companies, and usually with young kids at home, and like those are really good conversations. How to build a company, how to build a great team, how not to blow yourself up at home in the process. Right? I enjoy that. So.
I really appreciate you doing this.
I'm happy to.
You're we need more of you in the Valley. It's amazing. It's I appreciate your candor and almost self-actualization. It's refreshing.
Thanks, appreciate that, and thanks for having me.
Of course, I ask all my guests the same closing question, which is, when you hear the word grit, what comes to mind?
Fortitude. So, by that, I mean, I won't go on for a long time in this. Fortitude, which is the endurance to do things properly in a virtuous manner, which will always manifest itself in patience. If you're going to do something with grit, you're going to do it over a long period of time in the same way, without modification relative to your virtue in life. But you need to be patient in order to do that with yourself and with other people.
I think that's really well said. Mark, thank you.
Thank you.